And welcome to the second part of our literary criticism for 21-22, Poetry Explication, Part 2. And Mark Bernier, our state contest director, is going to lead the discussion. And so, Mark, thank you again for presenting your knowledge and wisdom to us.
Thank you, David. Thanks for the intro. And a reminder by way of, well, I'm at my daughter's house and there was a puppy, no problems there. This is a standalone. It is not connected directly to Wednesday's session, though I'm going to ask if there are any questions from Wednesday's covering Explication as we're doing it of the poems in a minute. But if you're looking at this session as a recording later on the summer of 2021, or working with your kiddos, your lit critters, in the fall or early spring of 21 and 22. This is a bit of a standalone from the other Poetry Explications. There are two this year. So that's my opening. I want to remind something that I should have said or emphasized back on Tuesday when we had the session, Introduction to the Contest for Beginners. And this is for all the coaches at any point in time. When you have a invitational or a district meet and beyond, it would be nice that the students who are going to write that tie-breaking essay, as I've kind of pointed to in the handbook, emphasized that they have lined blank paper, not just straight off the photocopier, out of the photocopier tray. These students who haven't written much and certainly can't write in a line might need lines, and it might give them a sense of it's looking okay. I can focus on what I'm writing about, not how it looks. It's not required by the contest, but it's something we can do to help. Meanwhile, I made reference to my willingness to travel afar, fairly afar, workshops, as David has reminded me. If I can get 2 or 3, 4 representatives, groups of representatives from 3 or 4 different schools, I'm happy to drive to a central location. The smart thing might be to do, if you're a 4A school, only invite 3As, 5As, 2As, that sort of stuff. And maybe leave your competition out. I'm kidding, of course. I'd love to, as we did a few years ago, do that 2 or 3 times. In addition to the student activities conferences, however they might come about this fall, and nothing's in stone there. I'll remind you that all of that would probably have to come through some not negotiation, but how your district and everybody else is handling the one I would drive to, handling this COVID as we maybe move away from it. So my first question is, are there any questions regarding the poems that we covered Wednesday? We spent a lot of time Wednesday afternoon on February afternoon, and then we ended up the session real quick with a run through of the true story of Snow White. And I might have rushed through something that you didn't catch or wish you would have someone speak to it a little more. I'll count to 7. Meanwhile, Angie, I've got David to post a amended handout that includes homeotelaton. It includes transsumption, metalepsis, and I believe it was Darren. It includes the rhyme, amphibamic rhyme. And I've got an example of a poem that is a fine example of that we'll talk about a little bit later on. So we will go to page 7. And David suggested, rather than staring at me, stare at, well, there it is. Well, that's not it, but he's going to find it. Page 7 of the first hand, there we go. And we'll look at just a light poem to get into our discussion, Texas poetry. I discovered this a few years back. I've used it a couple of times. And so we'll walk through it. And there's not much to say, just a lot to smile, I guess. Violette Newton's, she was a poet laureate of Texas some years back. And she writes, up east, they do not think much of Texas poetry. They think Texans have no soul for aesthetics, that all they do is pound their own chests, talk loud, and make money. But every time I'm nearing Austin, I look up at a painted sign high on the side of the highway that says Bert's Dirts, and to the pyramids of many-colored soil sold by Bert, and I swell with pride at the rhyming sign. I'd puff up and point to the terse little title and wish we could stop so I could go in and purchase a spondy of sand to make a gesture of my support for poetry in Texas. So what you think, Stacy? Here we have not so much metaphysical, good Lord, with dirt, maybe so, I don't know. Metafiction, we have an ode to the spondy. And the spondy that underpins the very advertisement, Bert's Dirts, accented. I guess that's all on that one. Move along. But I could use that with some good results, I think, in terms of tone, as we talk about Texas pride and beyond that, and to the East looking down on as perhaps is thematic in parts of Gatsby. I could put that in part 4 of the test and ask the lit critter to analyze this in terms of tone, and necessarily it would hinge on the fullness of Bert's dirt as a spondaic foot. So David, I'm going to ask you to go to another page. And that page is page 5. A standard for me anyway. Wordsworth's London 1802 at the bottom, sir. Thank you. Well, what we have here is a sonnet, obviously, 14 lines. We do not have a rhyming couplet at the end, so we're not doing an English sonnet. We look at the rhyme scheme and we'll start to make some determinations. I'll read through it first, once again, as I qualified my performance level this past Wednesday. This is not performance. It is simply getting through a bunch of words. London 1802. Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. England hath need of thee. She is a fen of stagnant waters. Altar, sword, and pen, fireside, the heroic wealth of hall and bower have forfeited their ancient English dower of inward happiness. We are selfish men. Oh, raise us up, return to us again and give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. Thy soul was like a star and dwelt apart. Thou hadst a voice whose sound was like the sea, pure as the naked heavens, majestic, free. So didst thou travel in life's common way in cheerful godliness, and yet thy heart the lowliest duties on herself did lay. The first word tells us it's an apostrophe. An apostrophe is the speaker or the persona of the poem talking and not expecting an answer. The first line reminds us that Milton, out of the 17th century, is no longer even in the early 19th century with Wordsworth. And so he's calling to the persona, or the speaker in the poem is calling to someone dead. This is apostrophe, from whom he does not expect an answer. That it's Wordsworth, we can be guaranteed that it is a speaker. He is a speaker. He's not adopting a persona. Thou shouldst be living at this hour. Hour rhymes with bower, rhymes with dower, rhymes with power. That's 8 lines there. There seems to be a shift. Suddenly we have 6 lines. So we have something toward an Italian sonnet by virtue of an octave and a sestet and no ending couplet. Line 9 starts with thy soul was like a star. There's no volta in terms of a logical progression from, say, a premise to a conclusion, nor is there a temporal sort of change, but there is a shift in the manner in which he addresses Milton. And I'd be willing to accept this as a volta. I don't know if I'd put it as a question on the test. So we have a quatrain and a quatrain making up an octave, and then we have a sestet. The sestet's rhyme scheme, apart rhymes with heart, thy heart. The sea rhymes with free, and way and lay. So we have a unrhymed sestet. So Italian with what I would argue is a volta. Rhyme scheme, ABBA. And then ABBA, we have what is in the handbook called enclosed rhyme, what was in the handbook before, and you'll see it in the study aid that I offer there as a link on the literary criticism page. You'll see it also called a envelope stanza. What we can note is that hour, bower, dower, and power end lines of 11 syllables, and we should recognize this as iambic pentameter with a weak ending, a feminine ending, and when it rhymes with another feminine ending, as hour rhymes with bower, this is feminine rhyme, sometimes known as double rhyme. Hour goes into England, hath needed thee, that's a run-on line. Remember Wednesday, though I've just said they're not connected, so I'll remind you, not having any regard for Wednesday, a sonnet is never a one stanza poem. This is an Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, so it's two stanzas, an octave and a sestet. We could argue that within the octave, there are two stanzas, quatrains, and we go from bower to half forfeited, and that's a run-on. But if we go from, if we were to go from power to thy soul was like a star, that would be on Jean Mont, enjambment, but there is end stop. So there is no end stop, excuse me, there is no enjambment in this sonnet. It is two stanzas, and everything that happens in the octave is understood as run-ons, not enjambment, and everything that happens in the sestet, likewise, run-on lines, not enjambment. Again, hour, bower, dower, power, these are 11 syllable lines. The last line is unaccented. This is feminine rhyme. Fin, pin, men, gin, as we say in Texas, or at least I do, all rhyming. And the rhyme is on a stressed syllable. This is masculine rhyme. Nobody get mad at me. We've inherited these terms here. So we have questions about feminine rhyme, masculine rhyme. We could ask a question about the stanzas within the octave, where we have either enclosed rhyme or whatever I said a while ago, envelope stanza. And we recognize not strong. You never want to have a poem that is written in iambic pentameter alone. It really starts to sound, the best word I can come up with nicely is silly. We might see us starting with a spondee, back to Bert's Dirt, Milton. And we'd know if he was from the south of England, if he had his middle name in there. Anyway, Milton, we start with a spondee, and throughout the poem, we're not going to see pure iambic pentameter, but it hints toward. So let's read. Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. England hath need of thee. She is a fin. We had a word the other day. What was that? Shaw. This is a copse. This is a fin of stagnant waters. It's not quite oxymoronic, but fins are not necessarily stagnant. But here's the possibility of the beauty, but we have stagnant waters. So the imagery, the auditory, the visual imagery of a beautiful copse, and suddenly it's stagnant water. And then we have clarification, altar, sword, pin, fireside. This is metonymy. These are words that represent concepts. They are not part of the concept as it plays forward as another noun. There are two sister tropes. One is metonymy and one is synecdoche. Synecdoche is usually understood as part of a whole or a whole for the part. All hands on deck is synecdoche. Altar is not part of the church. It's part of the building, but it's not. This is a representative aspect of religion. Sword, a representative aspect of the military. Pen, the same sort of relationship with the literary world, the authorship, the British canon, and fireside, all that has the poets, except for, of course, he was Irish, James Joyce, wanting to come back to the Isles. The heroic wealth of hall and bower. Hall and bower, the imagery there is full. Whether I think you could even, in terms of ringing sounds within the hall and the lack of ringing sounds in the garden bower, you could argue there's auditory imagery in there also. So the metonymic references to everything that makes up England through two empires, if not both sides of it, that state religion associated with the altar, the military, especially the Navy, when that comes into into play in the second part. What happened there, David? You keep smiling. And the sword associated with the military, but the military specifically, the Navy, as we'll see in the sestet a little bit later on, and the pen, of which here we have Wordsworth, and I don't know when this poem was written. Maybe it was 1802, and I don't think he was poet laureate at that time, but it's a reference to the fullness of the English language canon there in the UK. And Fireside, all that is English in terms of family, and with the exclusion perhaps of Heathcliff. Angie, I caught something on the screen there. Did you have something to say?
No, I was just telling David it was okay. That kind of thing happens to all of us.
Don't give David any excuses. Don't let him off the hook. Come on.
Anyway, yeah, lots of off the hook.
And so we're moving on to line 6. We are selfish men. Oh, raise us up and return to us again and give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. And that lack of conjunction there, that's a syndeton. Polysyndeton, and all these words I'll remind you are on page 8. Polysyndeton is the overuse of simple conjunctions, and asyndeton is the lacking of conjunctions in this line. And give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. Thy soul was like a star. And on occasion, we were reminded that English comes from the German, and the German still capitalizes every now and then come across. But this simile, like a star, and we remind ourselves, as I've already alluded to, that England and its military might, as much as anything, is built on its navy, and the star is, with the sextant and everything else, a guiding star. It's what that maritime empire would have needed. And so it is that Wordsworth is calling upon Milton as if he were the star by which to guide. And this is embedded. Thy soul was like a star, and here we have the simile, and dwelt apart, in some way untouched. The truth of it, as most of us know, is Milton knew how to get on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence and managed not to get hung or otherwise hanged, during the English Civil War. And so maybe this is a bit lacking in fact, but he wasn't dwelling apart, he was watching out. Thou hadst a voice whose sound was like the sea. Once again, the simile, but we have hadst and voice and whose and sound and was and see. This is Sigmatism. This is alliteration at the beginning of syllables, and that sibilant sound that follows in the words like hadst and voice and sound, and was. These sibilant sounds trail the syllables, so we have an example of Sigmatism. And I'll remind you, Sigmatism is not in the edition of the handbook that we are using, but on the list of terms I've put up and reminders in both Capital Conference and in our meetings with the students at Student Activities Conference, I make sure that you understand that's an eligible term. Don't know why they dropped it. Pure as the naked heavens, once again, a simile. Majestic, free, once again, a minor example of a syndeton. We're lacking a conjunction to accommodate the meter of the line. So didst thou travel on life's common way. That's a metaphor, but it's a metaphor so old, it's that journey that it won't even stand out as a metaphor. That's what we say. We're on our journey. We're on our shared way in cheerful godliness. Now, what I have to remind you here is that if Wordsworth, as he was this last year, I believe it was, our poet of choice, your lit critters would be responsible for understanding what cheerful means. It's not meaning what we have it here in the 21st century. Cheerful has everything to do with charitable, with charity. And thus in cheerful godliness, this is as he's already hinted, Milton has given us manners, or should give us manners by way of example. If we were alive with him, he needs to come back and be charitable in his godliness, be charitable in the way that he will offer us an example to emulate. And yet thy heart the lowliest duties on herself did lay. Complimenting him, maybe kissing up a little bit, the lowliest duties on herself did lay. Not unlike our friend Winston Churchill, who reminded us that even those who stand and wait are of such value as those who had fought in World War I and could not hit the battlefield in World War II, but were the home guard. Even the lowliest duties on herself, the soul, Milton took it upon himself to. And so in 1802, the beginning of the 19th century, England is at war with Napoleonic Europe, and all kinds of things that you know well, especially through the later Romantics, who pointed out to Peterloo and other transgressions of the government failing to attend to its social responsibilities, as Jimmy would attest. So that's what I have to say about London 1802. We have a sonnet, we have an octave, we have a sestet, we have quatrains, we have envelope stanza, we have enclosed rhyme, we have feminine rhyme, we have double rhyme, we have masculine rhyme, we have metonymy, we have a syndeton, we have similes, we have apostrophe, we have a volta, and the imagery, whether it's obvious as in the visual or subsumed into something like the wealth of hall. You can hear the hall of the 19th century, or even back, let's go to Beowulf, the resounding toast, the resounding healths, and the bower, the quietness of Christina Rossetti's bowers or something like that. There is an embedded auditory imagery throughout that. And then this sense of Milton being a leader as if he were the star upon which we could all point our sextants and make our way through our common way, the troubles of life. So plenty to ask about there. So when we come to a sonnet, be attuned to what kind of sonnet it is, how it is that it's that kind of sonnet, that we have what can be argued to be a turn makes it an Italian sonnet rather than a Miltonic sonnet, which by definition avoids the volta, avoids the turn. I'm listening for questions or comments or reminders that I did forget something.
I think in the middle of this talk about all of the devices that lead to the meaning, you have one of the really great poems of Wordsworth, because he's calling out to someone he didn't know, but he knows him through what he has written. And it's almost Dantean to say, you know, you're the Virgil, you're the guide. You know, we need to hitch our wagon to your star a little bit, because England at this moment, because England has never been, they've always been at the forefront of everything, military, the church, you know, the writings and everything. And he says, we are losing that right now.
Yes.
And he's calling upon his guide, almost like I said, but it's a guide that he knows well, although he doesn't know him. But he said, we need you. What would you say about this time? I think it's a beautiful poem.
It's a beautiful
poem. Yeah.
And up against, as I introduced it, Napoleonic Wars, and remember in his prelude, we witness his becoming very, the revolution becoming very suspect. And in broad terms, Wordsworth moves away from the notion of freedom to the fear of losing, in terms of conservative sort of aristocracy, that the monarchy. So I'm wondering here in Milton, all through that English Civil War, and leaving us with the first, one of the first pans to freedoms of speech with Areopagitica, if I'm remembering how to pronounce that. I think you got a real good point there, that Milton is someone in this time when we need, and we are at a juncture where, whether we're talking freedom of speech or assembling or anything else, and this is before the Great Reform of 1832, which changed quite a bit. Here we have Wordsworth attuned to the differences that might have been better addressed by someone like Milton. Thank you very much for that contribution.
So relative to that, you mentioned that star was capitalized maybe off of the Germanic ideas where they capitalize nouns, I guess. But could he be alluding to maybe the North Star with that, just reading star as a guide?
Yes, I
That's what
think that's
sailors
exactly.
did.
That's exactly it. Whether it's the North Star, because he doesn't get specific, and you could argue, and I think with success, nothing to say no to it, but I think he is a star, and reminding ourselves, just by way of my devil's advocate here, the British Empire included the Southern Hemisphere, and certainly they weren't looking to the North Star as they traversed the Indian Ocean or the Southern Pacific. But simply the star that the sextant or any other manner that a maritime power would look for guidance. So we could anchor in, I guess that's a inverse pun somehow, we could anchor in on the North Star as the star, or any star that serves our purpose. And Milton, we need you as that kind of, I won't say heavenly, but certainly removed, transcending figure to give us guidance. So there's, I say star as capitalized, reminding ourselves that the Germans capitalize anything, but we go back to the 18th century, we're still capitalizing things. That I remember Thomas Gray's church elegy in the country churchyard, the reification of ambition, and other abstract concerns are capitalized. So it's a tradition, it's poetic license, but I think it draws, as you've suggested, even for our students to understand it fully, like the North Star, to which upon which we make a lot of our transoceanic decisions. Thank you all very much. That's what I miss from being face to face with you guys. We can do it online too. Let's speaking of iconic stars, let's look at the death of Marilyn Monroe. That was a terrible segue. Page 2, David. Not much that I can ask about this poem in terms of, gosh, and we're just stuck with this term, literary devices, poetic expression. But something like this, especially as we get comfortable with things, a poem like this could find its way into part 4 easily enough, because there's a contrast set up, and my prompt would push toward that contrast and to find imagery and anything else, word choice, that might suggest the power of this contrast. Sharon Olds, I made reference to her Wednesday in terms of finding an anthology that we could use. Her anthologies are full of wonderful poems, but a lot of the poems we wouldn't be able to use with the youthfulness of our lit critters. I recommend Sharon Olds anyway. The death of Marilyn Monroe. While I say that, I think most of our students would recognize that name, but I don't think I have another poem where I can make this differential. On page 8, I have the term illusion, and under that term, I have 5 or so different types of illusion: classical, biblical, topical, historical, literal, and there might be another one. Here's the page: mythological. There's a difference between classical and mythological. I don't think I'd ever put them in the same set of distractors, because there's not closely enough demarcated a difference for our students. But what I want to speak to here, topical, here's where you need to be careful with your students, especially as we get into Macbeth. We might read Macbeth in, guess a year here, 2021, and it seems to us to be a historical allusion, but to Shakespeare's audience, contemporary audience, it is a topical allusion. So the witches, I won't ask this question because it's a tough question. are in some ways a mythological. But as we know, when James VI of Scotland came to England and became the James I, the monarch, and brought all kinds of stuff with him, and that Scottish stuff he brought with him generated an interest in things Scottish, and the Scots were real big on witches at the time. So the witches are actually topical and not mythological or historical or anything else. So the death of Marilyn Monroe reminds me, just by virtue of Marilyn Monroe having died a good 3/4 of a century ago, this might well be seen as a topical allusion rather than anything else. Though it's not alluding to anything, it just reminded me to go to that differentiation on page 8 for you. The death of Marilyn Monroe. The ambulance men touched her cold body, lifted it heavy as iron onto the stretcher, tried to close the mouth, close the eyes, tied the arms to the side, moved a caught strand of hair as if it mattered, saw the shape of her breasts flattened by gravity under the sheet, carried her as if it were she, tried again, Mark, as if it were she down the steps. These men were never the same. They went out afterwards, as they always did, for a drink or two, but they could not meet each other's eyes. Their lives took a turn. One had nightmares, strange pains, impotence, depression. One did not like his work. His wife looked different, his kids. Even death seemed different to him, a place where she would be waiting. And one found himself standing at night in the doorway in a room of sleep, listening to a woman breathing, just an ordinary woman. And what do I need to do, David? Breathing. A lot of things going on in there that the student might make reference to. Thank you, sir. I would point as kind of a point at which a discussion of contrast would take place, rather than calling it a bedroom, which has all kinds of connotations. We have the speaker making an observation in which it is a room of sleep, something quite in contrast to the usual associations the iconic Marilyn Monroe might represent. So while this is a poem of great beauty in terms of imagery, I think it's a poem of contrast, the contrast between the two men, contrast among the women, and the contrast as a response to women in these contexts where you're lying dead, you're lying on a bed, you're lying asleep. So it's a poem that would allow the lit critter to delve into the contrast by virtue of images that point to circumstance. I'm taking questions or comments. Okay, David, on page 6, please. Love poem, second sonnet there. Gary Miranda. A kind of slant. Now, I'm gonna start off with our looking at the rhyme. Glance, fence, once, chance, dance, bounce, mince, slants. Those aren't all clean rhymes, pure rhymes, true rhymes. I think we have some slant there. Anyway, a kind of slant. The way a ball will glance off the end of a bat when you swing for the fence and miss. That is, if you could watch that once up close and in slow motion. Or the chance meanings, not even remotely intended, that dance at the edge of words like sparks. Bats bounce just so off the edges of the dark at a moment's notice, as swallows do off sunlight. Slants like these has something to do with why angle is one of my favorite words. whenever it chances to be a verb. And with why the music I single out tonight, 18th century dances, made me think just now of you untangling blueberries carefully from their dense branches. I think probably we could find a lot of different titles for this poem, but that he uses a generic title, that is a title that points to the subject, and in the Aristotelian sense of the word, preying on that Renaissance genre, the topoi sonnet, which is about love, and then throwing in examples that we might categorize towards conceit, which is not in the on page 8. There are no conceits here, but a conceit is a comparison that's unexpected, and it's usually metaphorical. These are drawn out in similes and in controlling images. So it's conceit-like, that is unexpected, which is part of what he does with his opening, a kind of slant, the way a ball will glance off the end of a bat when you swing for the fence and miss. That is, if you could watch that once up close and in slow motion. So not only is there visual imagery, but we have, let's go ahead and say, late 20th century imagery into the slow motion that we might, by way of explication, dissect what we've just experienced, that is missing a ball rather than hitting the ball when you want to make contact. And then we have this simple conjunction or the chance meanings, not even remotely intended, that dance at the edge of words like sparks. So this simile, once again, like sparks, beautiful sort of thing, but these meanings that dance at the edge of words, we've got a literary term for that. That's not in on page 8, connotations. He's speaking about the beauty of poems, accidental, maybe peripheral, tangential, but the fullness of language that poetry abides with, that prose fails at times. Prose doesn't offer the ambiguity that poetry can. And boy, I don't know if that's cross languages or not. But anyway, here, the remotely, not even remotely intended, so that here's an awareness by the poet that you cannot depend on what is called an intentional fallacy. I might intend this poem to mean this, but all these words have different meanings. Dancing, I did not even remotely intend this. Dancing at the edges like sparks. Bats bounce just so off the edges of the dark. And so we've slipped from bats with the balls to bats that fly off the edges of the dark at a moment's notice, and move off through a simile to other birds, other critters that fly like bats, swallows do on sunlight. So we're catching the full range. The what's our word? Crepuscular bats, the bats in the twilight into the edges of the dark, and then the swallows off in the sunlight, the matitudinal and the diurnal notions. So we have a full encompassing across the clockwork of the day. Bats bounce off just like the sparks bounce off words, and swallows bounce off the sunlight. These similes set up in the natural world a sense of the potential of words in a poem especially that is about love, that, as we all know, I suspect, I'll speak on my own though, until 44 years ago, you never know if you're going to swing and hit the fence, and so Diane's not here to appreciate that illusion, but beyond that, moving from the octave to the sestet, we have clearly an enjambment. And he emphasizes that by putting white space between the octave and the sestet. Slants like these through a simile have something to do with why angle is one of my favorite words whenever it chances to be a verb. And with why the music I single, angle and single, not pure rhyme, what is that? That's when the consonants rhyme, but not the vowels. So this is consonants. Whenever it chances to be a verb, and with why the music I single out tonight, 18th century dances, which might well be purposeful, but it works very nicely with the rhyme, make me think just now of you untangling blueberries. So what do? I go to a wonderful movie, maybe y'all are familiar with it. Who did The Shining? Who did? Come on, guys, who's a great producer? Anyway, his movie, now I'm losing that too. Should put it in my notes if I'm gonna bring it up. Anyway, it'll come to me at a moment when it's not necessary. So we have this visual of 18th century dances with all the quadrillion, all those quadrilles, excuse me, and all that Jane Austen stuff. It made me think just of you untangling blueberries carefully from their dense branches. So this love poem and the confusion of love into something that I would push toward, only that it's in a sonnet and it's restricted in its length because of the 14 lines, something that Homer might do as we get lost in these minor epic similes. These are not epic similes, but by the time we get to the end of the sestet, we have left behind all that bit about words, and we're moving into all this bit about thorny branches or stickly branches of the blueberries. And so with this epic simile, or more specifically as we discuss it in most of the handbook, but it bleeds over into other discussions, a metaphor has two parts, a vehicle and a tenor. These words are not in page 8. A vehicle and a tenor. The vehicle is that to which something is compared, and the tenor is that which is being compared. In a Homeric simile, we lose track of what's being compared because Homer gets so deep into, in this case, the blueberries, that we might, or into the swallows, or into the bats, or into the bat swings, that we forget. And I think that's why we have such a strong emphasis in the title, Love Poem. None of this are we going to say in the way that we appreciate conceits. Most famous, I think, is John Donne's metaphysical conceit, where the two in love are compared to a compass with which you draw a circle, for instance, that comparing something metaphysical, love, to something very physical. So too here we have the power of words in a love sonnet being compared to the flying of bats at dark, the flying of swallows during the day, and the getting lost in the brambles of the blueberries, like we might get lost as we try to find our partner in an 18th century dance. A lot of stuff there. Questions I could ask the lit critters? Probably not as much as I've just presented, but part of what I hope to be able to do in these sessions is to have anybody acting as a coach find a poem that can be explicated, and maybe a little tougher to put into a contest because the specificity of some of the questions and the far-ranging implications by way of connotation here, but certainly because I can't find 4 good distractors. But it's a good place to start some conversation with your students, and to see the potential here with the rhyme scheme, what it does, the enjambment, what it does visually on the page, what he has done with the octave, which is very, the comparisons are with words, and we dance our way into a comparison wherein we see the relationships entangled as blueberries are. Something that contrasts, I think, tonally is on page, what page is it on, David? Insusceptibles, page 5. Thank you. the insusceptibles. There we are, another sonnet. Sonnets end up quite a bit, across 5 tests in a season. It might well be that I use 7 or 8 sonnets. We'll use more this season because of the poet we chose. The insusceptibles. Then the long sunlight lying on the sea fell, folded gold on gold, and slowly we took up our decks of cards, our parasols, the picnic hamper, and the sand-blown shawls, and climbed the dunes in silence. There were 2 who lagged behind as lovers sometimes do, and took a different road. For us, the night was final, and by artificial light, we came indoors to sleep. No envy there of those who might be watching anywhere the lusters of the summer dark to trace some vagrant splinter blazing out of space. No thought of them save in a lower room to leave a light for them when they should come. Adrienne Rich, we should all know her for any number of poems. And here's another. The title, if we recognize that there is a sense of, not unlike in Faulkner's A Rose for Emily, kind of a plural speaker here. And the speakers are speaking of themselves, insusceptible. And here we have the structure of the sonnet, and it is about love. And there is a contrast between themselves and the 2 who might come in late. What we should note here in this 14-line sonnet, it has a rhyme scheme that does not fit into our expectations, whether it's Petrarchan, Italian, or Miltonic, or Spenserian, or Shakespearean, or English, or Anglo, Norman. No, what we have are 7 couplets. This emphasizes the subject matter. See, we, parasols, sand-blown shawls. I think that emphasizes that this poem is about couples. I think that's the choice. And the contrast is wonderfully set up, I think, by a point I won't spend any time discussing here, the last couplet. No thought of them, save in a lower room to leave a light for them when they should come. I think there's ambiguity in that rhyme, and we have older lovers, and we have a recognition of younger lovers that shows up in that contrast that's embedded, pun intended, in that last word. Let me take you back up just for the heck of it to lines 3 and 4. Note that sand-blown shawls rhymes with our parasols. That's an example of mosaic rhyme, heteromerous rhyme wherein one word is rhymed with 2 or 3 words. In this case, 2 words are rhymed with another 2 words, but the rhyming unit is across those double words. I don't think I'd use that as a question, but it's something you should point out to your lit critters. I think we have time for 2 more poems at least. Let's look on page 6, David. Sonnet for Jill. At the top, go back, there you are, friend, thank you. Sonnet for Jill. I've had this in a study packet before, and I noticed when I brought it up, I dropped a couple of punctuation marks. So I hope to do Jeremy, who's one of our colleagues, 2A, does awfully well each year. Would have been at stake except for that wild card thing. Anyway, he sent this to me. He's doing what he does in graduate level creative writing. He writes, a story, Jill, who was I believe she was a state champion one year. A story, Jill, as you already know, is a character who wants something and who goes through conflict to get it. And so must you. Graduation's less an end than a beginning. Every hero, before she's earned the title, must endure her tests. A bit of a pun there, I guess. Lose friends, lose sleep, lose hope and heart and more. And the more is the thing. The self who starts the quest must die with all mirages, all facades. but you're prepared. You have a foundation. You'll face up to challenges, beat the odds, and write a story that's an inspiration of all the stories that you'll teach in class. It's yours that matters most, the one that lasts. And in the classical Elizabethan mode, the couplet sums up thematically the fullness of the sonnet. Everything is a very straightforward practitioner's enjoyment of the sonnet form. On that same page, David, Arms and the Boy, Wilfred Owen. I can't see faces in the way I face to face, so I'll just go ahead and rhetorically, how many of y'all recognize the title as being an allusion? So it is that we have an allusion to something that Jimmy referred to earlier, which I guess is another illusion of an illusion. I sound like, there's that boy, that name will come to me someday. Arms and the Boy, straight out of Virgil's. Yeah, Stanley Kubrick, thank you. Stanley Kubrick did a movie, Clockwork Orange. I recommend it with a little hesitancy, but in it, his protagonist is in a record shop, and on the shelves are the soundtracks to other movies that Stanley Kubrick had put together. So this illusion with an illusion sort of thing. Thank you, Jimmy. And thank you very much, Angie. Arms and the Boy is an allusion to Virgil's Aeneid. Opens up with, I'm translating very loosely, this is a story about arms and the man. So this is an anti-war poem coming out of the experiences of the First World War. Most of you have run across it, but it exemplifies a number of things that show up on my test. Let the boy try along his bayonet blade how cold steel is, and keen with hunger of blood, blue with all malice like a madman's flash, and thinly drawn with famishing for flesh. Lend him to stroke these blind, blunt bullet heads which long to nuzzle in the hearts of lads. Or give him cartridges of fine zinc teeth, sharp with the sharpness of grief and death. For his teeth seem for laughing round an apple. There lurk no claws behind his fingers supple, and God will grow no talons at his heels, nor antlers through the thickness of his curls. We have 3 quatrains, and our rhyme scheme catches our attention quickly. Blade and blood, flash and flesh, heads and lads, teeth and death. The world is not in kilter, it's out of kilter. And what Owens has done is taken this expectation of rhyme in this quatrain form, and he has shifted it from true rhyme to this consonance and we have consonants rhyming, not the quality of the vowels. Let the boy try. Now what we have to do is remind our lit critters, the dictionary, especially the Oxford English Dictionary, is always a good place to start. Try here is not attempt, but test. Let the boy test. Let the boy feel along this bayonet blade. And then we got alliteration. There's a lot of this we could argue is coming out of the Anglo-Saxon, the Old English prosody, with the alliteration and a few other things that we might attend to in a minute. How cold steel is, and keen with hunger of blood. So we are personifying at this point the bayonet blade, having it keen and hungry for blood. The imagery takes over here and almost is subsumed into this personification. Blue with all malice, like a madman's flash, and thinly drawn with famishing for flesh. And alliteration takes over again, and thinly drawn, you've got all kinds of things working with the word drawn, whether it's in the manufacture or the removal of the sword, the bayonet from its holding the spot. Lend him to stroke these blind, and lend along the lines of the idiomatic British at the turn of the century, try and lend. Let him, show him, lend him to stroke these blind, blunt bullet heads, which long to nuzzle in the hearts of lads. And the contrast of the imagery and of nuzzle and hearts and all that might be. And suddenly you realize it's a bullet wishing to get that close to the life source of the lad, of the youth, the arms and the boy, the lad, the youth. Or give him cartridges of fine zinc teeth, sharp with the sharpness of grief and death. Once again, the end rhyme, teeth and death, not jiving perfectly as one would expect in a poem. This is showing there is something not good. And here we have sharp and sharpness. This is polyptoton. These words are coming from one word, sharp, and we're using a form of that same word in the word sharpness. And we also have sigmatism, sharp, sharp, and S. For his teeth seem for laughing round an apple. Imagery right there. And the laughing takes us nicely. But if we go and we spend a half a moment with a modest proposal of Jonathan Swift and the imagery of the child with an apple in its mouth, I think the resonating illusion, the embedded illusion is here. And we see sacrifice here on a platter being helped off to war, to die. But the surface image is laughing around the apple, the youthful, unaware, not being challenged by the vicissitudes of life that define wartime. He's happy to bite an apple, but also there's an embedded illusion because the first time we bit an apple, we got ourselves in trouble, didn't we, back in the garden? So there's a lot of stuff going on in these four words, laughing round an apple, with, I believe, Eve, and what our friend in the modest proposal does with the child on the platter, and here the ostensibly innocent boy that should be enjoying life is being sent off to war. There lurk no claws behind his fingers supple, the claws that are used for, among other animals, fighting, though I think we've done it ourselves. And God will grow no talons at his heels. The imagery pushing towards something like a fighting rooster, and birds that fight with their talons, the eagles that bring about death at his heels, nor antlers, again, another in the natural world implement of, dare I say, in an anthropomorphic way, war through the thickness of his curls. And the thickness of his curls is just as beautiful, somewhere between metonymy and synecdoche. Here is the youthfulness, the androgynous. We have not made a man of this person with talons, with antlers, with claws. He's still in his youth and has not been demarcated, separated out, chosen for war just yet. Arms in the boy. Let me sing of arms in the boy. Let me sing how we turn boys into men with military arms. So questions about the rhyme scheme, questions about the imagery, questions about the tone, questions about the personification, questions throughout regarding the personas, or here in this case, we know Wilfred well enough to know this is he, the speaker, and his attitude toward war. With it all based in the allusion to Virgil's, interestingly, satiric at times, take on war himself. That's all I've got today. I'm looking at a clock somewhere. I think we're right at the top of the hour. Yepper. Any questions for me? Let's just do one more at the top of page, David. Page 7, is it? Yes, page 7. X.J. Kennedy, who, wonderful man. Anyway, I slumbered with your sonnets on my bosom, the net result of trying to peruse them. Don't let your lit critters fall asleep reading. There you go back, there you are, right there, X.J. Kennedy, thank you. Don't let your lit critters fall asleep reading Barrett Browning's sonnets. And once again, we have something toward heteromerous mosaic rhyme. My bosom rhymes with perusum. So there we are. I wish you, in the getting back together with your Lit Crit teams, all the love and fun that comes with that. I hope that your campus, your district allows us extracurricular time to do that sort of stuff in the face of however we climb down from this world of COVID. And know that I'm available by way of this email address that's pretty solid now, dieburn@SBC Global, and a phone call. We can establish something there once you contact me by email. And I don't mind driving anywhere except to Sonora. I'll go anywhere. Darren, what you got? Okay, great. Anytime you have a question, Darren, let me know, please. Hello, Shelley. Thank you. Jimmy, good. Thank you for talking and bringing in some discussion, Jimmy. Appreciate it. Okay, thank you, Angie. Stay strong with that STEM end, okay, with the anatomy and physiology. You know, it comes into some good figure poems. Carmen Figuratum, there's some good anatomical stuff in that. Yeah.
Oh, I'll jot that down. They'll love
Yeah.
me for that.
It's in one of those, it's about four seasons ago, I think I had it at state test. You send me an email, I'll look it up. There's two
Okay,
of them,
thanks.
anatomical. Thank you, Bonnie. Anything else, David? Bye-bye. Two views of a cadaver room. Write that down. You got that, Angie? Two views of a
Yes, sir.
cadaver room. There's a good memory. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thanks, Jimmy.
All right. Thanks, Mark, for another great session, and thank everyone for joining us today.
Oh, excuse me. Miss
All
Nye,
right.
Sylvia, are you there? Let me know you're there, Sylvia. Sylvia, David, go to that handout I gave you this morning. Please, Olivia, Mary Oliver's poems. Jeez, Sylvia, don't let me do that. There is not much I would do with this poem for the test. I could ask Sylvia, the Lit Critters, to look at this and speak to the personal journey in terms of tone and maybe epiphany, but it's not a poem like the one I picked out that's, as I think I said in my email to you, already on my short list, hint, hint, of a Mary Oliver poem that I could test on. But let's go through the journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own and kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Beautiful stuff. Oliver's stuff is wonderful. Her nature poetry, long loved. Death at a Great Distance, where we move from the mushrooms that kill flies down to the cottonmouth that could kill anything it goes after. Beautiful imagery there in a cascading visual form. But your point there, thank you for sending the poem, Sylvia. I could use this in part 4, but there's nothing I could do with this to pull out, it's a personal requisite not to waste students' time reading a bunch of poems in part 3. I'd have to find about four questions on this one, and the melopoetic, the literary terminology that would have us spending a lot of time with the handbook. It's not quite there. And again, there's the epiphany, and there's the tone, there's the journey, and there's the word choice. Beautiful poem. So discussing it within the context of the contest would be restricted to part 4. Thank you for contributing, Sylvia. And on the bottom of that page, Edmund Wilson's example of what I think Devin brought up Wednesday, trying to rhyme school with lose, I believe it was. And if you spell school backwards, you'll have a rhyme, as here with ripple and leper, air and ray, lissom and mussels, gulls and slug. That kind of rhyme that was not and is now in the list on page 8. It wasn't there. Thank you, Devin, if that was you, for pointing that out Wednesday. Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. 2:08, kept you long enough. Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Angie. Bye-bye.